All right. Whoa, is that a gun from the future?
Yeah. And now I've got a clip of ammunition for my plastic Armalite.
Hey guys, welcome to another FUD Blasters. And this time we're going to talk a little bit about what could have been.
What could have been, what maybe what should have been.
Perhaps. This is a AR180B. Not sure how much you know about the AR-18, but basically this is a modernized Mark Westerm, once he acquired Armalite, decided he was going to do it better. He usually didn't, but why don't you talk to us about like what got us here and your idea, because I think you had a really cool point about the future, the possible future that we'd be looking at.
So if we back ourselves up a long way, 1959, Armalite sells the patents for the AR-15, AR-10, right? That gas system design, as well as a lot of intellectual property, gets sold to Colt. Now, Armalite doesn't go away at this point. A lot of people figure that Armalite sold the entire company out to Colt. This isn't the case. Armalite was in financial dire straits, but its parent company, Fairchild, wasn't quite done with it yet. Fairchild would soon be done with it, and Armalite would be sold off away from Fairchild, but it would maintain most of its original staff. Among its original staff, Eugene Stoner was gone at this point, but Eugene Stoner's sort of last thing he did at Armalite was design the AR-16. The thought behind the AR-16 was, Stoner long maintained that 308 was the direction the military was more interested in going than 223. So Eugene Stoner came up with the idea that a lot of the militaries they'd been trying to sell the AR-15 to were ones that were not quite third world, but they weren't like America, right? Because there's two countries really on Earth at this point that had aluminum industries. Yeah. It was the United States and it was Russia. There were some small countries in Europe that had it to the extent that they had it for airplanes, but America, you could buy raw aluminum forgings, billets, you could get them made. A lot of other countries, if you asked for aluminum, they'd go, what? Yeah. Like, car industry had also had it for engine blocks or sometimes, but that's all cast and it's all funky alloys. It's really funky stuff.
You get aluminum and like salt.
And so America was pretty far ahead of the curve there. So they were looking at the AR-15 was primarily being marketed to Southeast Asian countries. Being 223 caliber, they were huge on it, right? Because all the European militaries at this time, even the Russian militaries, were making 30 caliber stuff that isn't well suited to smaller framed, smaller statured people. Every AR-15 they saw, they're out of their minds for it. And really the only thing they requested to change about it is they wanted their AR-15s with no select fire. They wanted semi-auto only. Nobody ever obliged them this because it doesn't really, in fact, probably in the economy of scale, it ends up being cheaper just to leave it on there. But that was sort of their one request was, can you make it without full auto for our military? But they see this, but the problem that they have, their hang up is militaries that are looking at getting a lot of a gun want to build the gun in their country. It just makes sense for logistics and security reasons. It's really hard to bite the bullet and say we want to adopt the AR-15 if you don't, not even a budding aluminum industry, you don't make aluminum. Right. Because then if you're buying the billets, if you're buying forgings, if you're buying whatever from an American company, you might as well just be buying the whole guns. Right. That was the lesson Japan learned in World War II is you can't trust the people you used to be friends with. So this sort of presented a problem for a lot of those countries, and Eugene Stoner saw this, and Armalite saw this, and so they put to work designing a gun that would be built more traditionally. It's sheet metal, it's stamped, it's welded. It's really hard to find a country that doesn't have, by the 1950s, 1960s, that doesn't have the capability to make sheet metal, doesn't have the capability to build it, bend it, doesn't have the capability to weld it. Besides that, it was more or less AR-15 complexity, right? It had the rotating bolt, but the AR-16 was designed with a short stroke gas piston system. Not quite like the SVT, but in that same vein, right? It was certainly inspired by those sorts of systems. By the SVT, I doubt they could have seen an SKS by then. Yeah. So those sort of gas piston systems. So that was sort of the inspiration that was taken there. Now, the reason they had done that originally, right, at the time that the AR-16 started being designed, if I've got my dates remembered correctly, Armalite did still have the gas system patents, but the gas tube is one of the most complex parts to manufacture in an AR-15 because tube bending technology for that thin of tubes is kind of jacked up. Yep. Also, the precision that you need in machining the bolt carrier and bolt in a pre-CNC world, it's kind of fantastic that Colt managed to make these guns work. Yeah. A lot, because we're talking like a thousandth of an inch is a different in it sealing and it not sealing. If it doesn't seal, it doesn't run. Yep. So a piston system, you can get away with a lot. Yep. A lot by the way of imprecision. So the AR-16 sort of takes that approach. Now, the AR-16, right, is 308. A couple of prototypes are made. The U.S. military, along the way, ends up testing it, which is very interesting because as the AR-15 has issues, The Army realizes the M14 is on its way out. Right? We're not getting those. Spew, which was sort of the Wunderwaffe program where they're trying to like do flechette ammo and grenade launchers, and it's probably going to even shoot laser death rays potentially. They realize that's made up and doesn't work. Yeah, the only thing that salvage out of that is underbarrel grenade launchers, which even eventually go the way of the Dodo. Right? These days people like standalone's better because you have the downsides of having a grenade launcher and a rifle you're aiming all the time. Kind of inconvenient. So, regardless, right? That's not going to give us anything, right? And the Army sees that. So the Army now has the AR-15 as its sole thing. And the AR-15 by 1966 is nothing but problems, right? They've got problems with ammunition. They're trying to work through the problems. And Colt is promising them, just buy the new buffer from us and it will fix all the problems. And funnily enough, it does, right? Yeah. The buffer is the sole thing with the AR-15 that fixed the most problems was replacing the buffer. And then your chrome lining of things increased. The bad failures were the failures to extract, and the chrome lining actually caused more of those to happen, all else being equal, which is interesting to track these sorts of things, and the data is what it is. But the Army was sitting here in 1966 going, Colt wants us to buy more parts from them to the tunes of millions of these parts, and that's going to fix the gun? Yeah. Okay.
Your little spring dingus?
Okay. That's going to work. And so the Army is starting to look at other guns. Armalite has just designed, and this was without Eugene Stoner, right? This was Sullivan, I think Fremont were involved in this, but they had scaled down, right? Scaled down is a very imprecise way to put it because there's no such thing as scaled down. Right. They had designed an AR-16 style system in 5.56 caliber, 223, 5.56, what have you. But they had put this together, and the U.S. Army does test it at some rate. Now, nothing ends up happening with that. The AR-15 does end up being solved by Colt's magical mystery buffer, which is like, it's just like got a dead blow system inside, which is like so hilariously simple. Like the Edgewater system's like, it's got rings, and the rings will stick together and not stick together. Yeah. It's a bush lock.
And then Colt's like,
it's fucking a shake weight. Yeah. And that's the way things go there. And the AR-18 sees a tiny bit of success. They end up licensing manufacture to England. The UK gets some AR-18s. Yep. AR-18s show up in a little kerfuffle that happened on one of the little islands around the islands. They licensed manufacture to Japan. Some of the rifles are even made at Armalite itself. Right. But by this time, Armalite's sort of a sinking ship. They needed a big military contract, and that never ended up coming through. The AR-18 would more or less be the last sort of last hurrah of the actual original Armalite company. It split up and dissolved, and that's more or less the end of that story, right? They made AR-18s, and then they made a semi-auto version, the AR-180. Yep. And it was sold as like a accurate gun. Armalite would go on to talk about how much better it was than the AR-15 because they'd sold rights to the AR-15, so now they're in direct competition with the gun they designed, which is never a possession, especially because that gun bears your name. Yeah. Like you got rid of of course, Armalite never registered the trademark for the AR-15. They certainly would have been the ones to own it, but Colt's the one that ends up registering it because they bought the design and sort of specified, we own the names now, right? And so Colt ends up getting away with that. So now Armalite's in competition with a gun that has the same name. That said, it's a competition of like 5,000 guns a year because nobody's interested in the more tactical stuff. And the AR-180 sales numbers bear that out. Even though they had AR-180s that were also made in England, also made in Japan, right? They even licensed out manufacture of the semi-auto guns, then were imported and sold here. Right. Nobody bought them. Nobody wanted them. It was very, very, very poor sales numbers.
And a lot of people will say, it's because the AR-15s were so cheap that blah, blah, blah. No. That's not true.
Right. The AR-18s were not cheap when they were imported, but Colts are also really expensive. It's like $1,800 is what sporters cost. Yeah. Right? In today's money is $1,800.
Yeah. So it was not that, you could just go buy an AR-15. It was that people were not buying this stuff.
It wasn't popular in the
commercially,
first place. And by the time people are interested in buying it, the AR-180 is like not a thing anymore. Right. But also, this wasn't the gun that did the Vietnam. Right. And the reason that tactical stuff picked up in the first place was people that had just went and did the Vietnam.
They were like, I remember that.
They wanted one like that. Yeah. And this didn't actually get to be a part of that. And so then the people who end up wanting the original AR-180s is the people who are obsessed with the Irish Republican Army. Right. And then they wrote a song about it. Yeah. That's like 90% of the reason people, the roadie boos want the foul because there's like a song about it or something. The 180 for the same reason.
Yeah, the bangers and mash boos want the 180.
Fast forward, right? That's your background information on the AR-18, where it came from, sort of what it did nothing, it flopped. It was
there was a couple things though about the 180 because I have one. Yep. Almost everything is stamped, including the magazine catch and the fire controls, and it feels that way. Yes.
It feels poorly made.
It feels very poorly made, and it does not take a standard magazine.
Yes, it uses magazines that are identical for all intents and purposes to AR-15 magazines, but they change where the slot in the cutout for it is.
And they did that so that you could have the same ergonomics, but that they could do it with a single piece of stamped sheet metal. So that's one of the big infuriators with the. Oh, and by the way, you can't just modify an AR-15 mag and have it work for both because you have to crush out the opening on the other side. You can modify an AR-15 mag, but it's
doesn't work well.
Yeah, it doesn't work well. So that's kind of the backdrop of where the 180 was, and then we get to post Armalite.
Yep.
Right?
So the Armalite name ends up being sold to Eliseo in the Philippines, and they manufacture AR-15s there. And the Philippines have decided that the AR stands for the initials of a guy who worked at Eliseo, who they claim designed the AR-15, which isn't true. Sorry, Philippine bros, it's not true. But they used the name for a while. They actually manufacture their own AR-15s there even to this day. Their military uses AR-15s, and in fact, they've done like wars against there's Islamic terror that takes place in the islands over there.
Yeah,
it's like again, it's not something that gets talked about in U.S. news, but they've had serious large scale military operations against insurgencies over there that they've used the AR-15s they made in, which is very interesting. Now, eventually the Armalite name gets sold back into the United States. Now, Mark Westerm is a semi-controversial figure in the AR-15 story. He had worked at the military. He was sort of in charge of CMP, competitive shooting sort of things, amongst other things. He did other stuff. People don't like it when I oversimplify, but that's the relevant part of his story here. He was involved in competitive shooting with the AR-15, specifically M16A2s, accurizing them for national match shooting. He was a big M16A2 fan, by the accounts I've seen. But after his time at the Army, he's interested in taking the things he's learned about accurizing rifles, AR-15s, service rifles, these sorts of things, and expanding it. One way or the other, he ends up coming into the fold with the Eagle Arms Company, which at this point had been getting AR-15 parts kits as well as making some AR-15 parts, and then getting lowers from Sendra and putting them together and then selling AR-15s. Depending on who you ask, these were either some of the best clones or some of the worst clones of ARs and M16s that were available. So quality may vary. It may also just be people's memories are a little shoddy because nothing was a Colt, and also Colts weren't good quality in the first place. People are trying to justify the Eagle Arms costing half of what Colts cost at this point in times. But Mark Westerm ends up owning, having an ownership stake in Eagle Arms, ends up buying the Armalite name. He applies the Armalite name to the rifles, but of course the AR-15 trademark is still Colts. Right. So the Armalite AR-15s are now M15s, and he calls them Armalite M15, So that's all sort of silly. Yeah. But one of the projects he comes into, one of the things he comes into is the technical data for the AR-180. Now, being the guy that he is, he sees the AR-180 for what it is. It's not a bad system. It's actually kind of smart, but there's material defects with the way it's designed, right? It being designed for third world countries sacrifices a lot of stuff that, especially for commercial arm in the U.S., you don't have to do a stamped and welded lower that's like 5 different pieces, right? You don't have to do that. You don't need a fire control group that's like the hammer is literally a flat piece of steel that's got, you don't have to do that.
Your mag catch doesn't have to be a U.
It does not have to. And especially with, while this all was happening, the AR-15 was not the dominant firearm it is today, right? Everything was not AR-15itized. Yep. But that was the direction, those parts were available, right? For people who wanted to do it, those parts were available.
At great expense.
Yeah, and so Mark Westerm has the idea of, why don't you take an AR-18 upper and put it on an AR-15-ish lower? So, of course, the lower on that becomes the AR-180B, right? That's the genesis of the AR-180B, is a commercial venture by Mark Westerm's Armalite to make a AR-15, AR-18 hybrid to sort of serve that. When these things come out, right, they're as expensive as AR-15s are. It's not like any money's being saved, but it's different. And different is cool. And the thing that would kill this is the fact that AR-15s weren't cool. So different of cool might be more cool. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants it. So that ended up being the defect of these guns, as well as they had some strength issues, things that would have come out had these guns really caught on. Right. And then the subtle irony then there is, had the Army had things gone differently in 1966, had Colt's magic buffer not worked the way it needed to. And I forget the name of the Colt engineer who came up with it, but he's a brilliant guy who worked at Colt for a long time. He came up with a lot of other stuff that was like, oh, wow, that's a great improvement for the AR-15. It's like all this guy. So he, for me, he's the guy that Stoner attributes. Everybody attributes Stoner for making the AR-15 and making it great. It's simply not true. Stoner's AR-15 was a shit pile. even he didn't like the gun, right? He was jaded about it his whole life. Like after somebody else made a lot of money, he made a lot of money off of it. But other people made a lot of money.
Yeah, he
off
didn't
of
get to retire in 2 ranches instead.
Right, and so he was jaded about it for that reason, certainly, and he comes across that way even when he talks about it. But he was probably also certainly jaded from the fact that, like, his AR-15 was not a good gun, and the people attributing bad things happening in Vietnam to him isn't entirely unfair.
Right.
And at the I-Court hearings, he and in the the Congress itself wanting the Army to be the issue, blamed the Army for it, but the Army didn't make those questionable design choices, and they objected to them very early on. But regardless, right, that sort of lands us at this, and had the Army made a different decision in 1966, and this becomes the gun that takes over in Vietnam. I think the AR-18 could have been modernized, could have been updated, right? And you could have had because this is not a regular AR-18 rear sight. This is an M16A2 sight. That I think this would have happened, right? The Marines would have insisted on that. The Marines would have insisted on a heavier barrel. All these same things would have happened. All of the same things would have happened. You'd maybe go right. Eventually, you'd have quad rails up here, and you'd put laser designated, great big flashlights on it when you invade Panama, and the entire alt history where this is the rifle that gets adopted, this is the rifle that gets developed, this is the rifle that gets a pick rail put on it eventually. This is what everyone has in PSA shit.
Right. He kept that whole "this is an accurate rifle" thing, and you do have your proprietary scope mount thing.
And PSA could be shitting these out for $400. It could have happened, and nothing would have prevented that from happening except for the fact that it didn't happen.
Right, that's true. And here's the real criminal thing. And we'll talk about some of the problems with the 180B specifically, but this thing shoots amazing.
It shoots really well. It shoots well.
I think it shoots nicer than an AR-15. How many asterisks do you need, right?
It shoots better than the bottom of the barrel AR.
It shoots better than or even like an SP. Depending on the SP, right. So, but this was made by Westerm's Armalite, right? It's dog shit.
Yeah.
Like, it's really poorly put together. It shoots great. Yeah. I love this gun. So let's get into some of the reasons it's not that great. Right. And the main thing is that you can't get around that this is a ban era gun.
Yep.
You wind up with the full stock. A bunch of weird decisions get made, and you wind up without a threaded barrel.
Yep.
I added that bayonet lug. Yep. You did not have a bayonet lug. But the weirdest thing is, they're like, let's make it cheaper, like the AR-15. The lower is not doing anything.
I like the polymer lower.
Yep.
But the design approach was wrong.
They didn't. Yes. So they go for a one-shot polymer lower.
I don't hate it.
Not bad.
Good idea.
Grip is integral.
Good idea.
Not bad. They didn't think hard enough.
Right.
So let's get this off and show. So we push in this rear piece. Out come your guide rods and recoil spring, which is, the most brilliant part about the AR-18 that's copied the most to this day. Out comes your charging handle from the little opening there. Out comes your square bolt. Right. You got an E-clip here. We're gonna have to take that off to show what's going on. That's a little annoying.
Yep.
But hey, it is simple. Yep. One pin, and it all comes apart. Once your recoil guide rods are out, you can take off the top. This does not come off until you take off the gas plug, which is funny.
It's just permanently held on there.
Yep.
More or less.
And, there's your gas system that you've seen a million times in every other AR-18, like, cue the meme, oops, all AR-18, right? But this is the interesting part because it's the linchpin. One, Mark Westerm always put that on all his guns. And what's the story on that again?
I think it's just like an eagle or the U.S. marksman or side.
Yeah, it's the silk mark that they would put on at their, match guns or whatever. And he thought it was weird that the guns didn't have them, so he made sure all his guns did. Even though precisely none of them were ever accepted. But it's neither here nor there. You have a very interesting lower that has some very mature choices, such as the way the reinforce and serialization plate works. Brilliant. Added in a bolt catch, no bolt release. You don't really need the release,
right? And they could have had a release on there. Right? They certainly could have grafted it on there, but that would have complicated the mold severely because getting bigger in your smallest dimension isn't great for your mold.
Yep. And it's mostly an AR-15 fire control with a completely incompatible selector.
Yep.
What else is incompatible?
This AR-15 mag release is straight up.
That's straight
difference.
up. That's straight up. You do have your selector is completely different because you don't have a spring hole. It's actually a coil spring, and the arm of the spring is resting.
It makes it so this is the least tactile.
Yeah.
Like it does hold in position,
but it goes moosh.
It like sort of breaks over there, and it doesn't snap into place. It just just mooshes.
Kind of settles. Yeah. But we only have this one takedown pin, and the rest of it is just the recoil plate going into this hole in the stock.
Right, and so there's all of the force whenever the bolt comes home, right? All of that force that's keeping that upper from coming off the gun
is going forward on that plastic little boss. And they knew enough to reinforce the fire control cavity holes. But this is just straight plastic, I think.
And I believe so, because I've seen pictures of them online that have cracked all the way through. And that ends up being the death knell of these guns, that eventually the front lugs want to crack. In the age of 3D printing, right? Not a big problem. As well as in the age of more mature plastic welding, right?
Yeah.
Just go ahead and weld on a new front section to your gun. But it's sort of a failing, and it doesn't. It probably just comes down to the fact that they weren't fully aware of designing polymer lowers, right? Because it had been done before by Colt in the 60s as an experiment for AR-15s, and they dropped it because it didn't work.
Yeah.
And much besides that, there's not a lot of that. The Russians did stuff with Bakelite, right? But whatever. Right. Again, prototype and stupid, and also didn't work. It's like American stuff that doesn't work. Russian stuff that doesn't work.
Wow! It's my head is, what's that super pistol grip one?
The oh man, jeez. I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
The AK-9 millet grips through the pistol grip. Yeah.
It's completely impossible to hold.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heckin' World Sabrino. Right, whatever it is.
But yeah, you've got a lower that had they knew how to do metal reinforcements, right? That was could have been installed after the fact there, but I don't think that was shot in the mold. I think it was installed afterwards. But all they needed was a feature further back in the gun that made it so that there's not just this one lug holding the upper on it. And this thing would have held up great. They could have integrated it into here. Frankly, right, they've got the metal reinforcement there at the back.
So you know what? If one of these ever broke, you could weld a lug on there and just put a hole there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'll do if this one ever breaks.
The simple way, right, is just a hole right there and have a push pin, right, AR-15 takedown pin, or just another E-clip pin would suck because it'd make the disassembly harder, but it would make the gun stronger. Even just a straight up lug, right? So you've got your reinforcing plate here. Just have a shelf come across there, and then have a shelf welded on here, and those shelves hold against each other. There you go. It's not going to be trying to break, especially if you made it so the pin here at the front had a little bit of wobble built into it front back. The same way that the AR-15's rear.
Weld a plate here.
Right. You can just have a plate here, even holding against the polymer pocket there.
It'd be better.
Right.
Yeah.
So this certainly could have been fixed. Unfortunately, the AR-18 or AR180B, right? It didn't sell terribly, and whenever you look online, I feel like I see more 180Bs than I do 180s. By a lot. And so its sales numbers weren't bad. It was in production until the point that stuff got interesting right through the ban era, right? That was by the end of the ban era, this stuff was like hotcakes. Couldn't keep them in stock. People were willing to pay tons. People were paying $1,000 for bottom of the barrel ARs. Right. ARs was like crappy cast lowers, $1,000.
Yeah, messy Hessies.
Right, everybody wanted that stuff when this ran out, and that this gun would have been a prime contender. These days, people go nuts over this upper with a lug back there that goes on an AR lower. Lose their minds about it. Right, $800 easy, just shelling it out. There's not $800 of complexity there, not even close. Right, less complexity here than an AR upper.
100%.
15 upper, right?
It's a bunch of lathe parts. Bunch of lathe parts and some simple sheet steel.
Like in terms of machining complexity, there's no gas sealing going on in the bolt. Like, what's your inspections there? Like, I guess you can drop a gauge pin in it if you want to, but the parts are their own gauge pin at that point. If they fit together, it will work as long as they're not too rattly loose. As opposed to AR-15, right? There's gas sealing going on in there, so it actually does need to be gauged, or doesn't, and then it won't work sometimes. So it's this is an imminently manufacturable upper. And so it makes sense, right? This all just makes sense Mark Westerm was doing this almost, before the BRN or
Right.
the WKC or the JARD or whatever. Right? There's a million different companies doing the same basic thing now. I'm even going to lump the PSA Jackal in there, even though it's a different piston on there. More or less the same idea that they're going for. And Mark Westerm was way ahead of the game and stopped making them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was because of warranty issues with the pin breaking, or maybe their AR sales were just so good it was like it does not make sense to keep making these.
Right.
But the AR180B, leaves manufacturer. You can find new old stock parts from them still. Those still exist, right? But
that's what this one was put together with.
Yeah.
So this is, I actually only had like half of the upper and the lower.
Yeah.
And then we found that you could just buy almost everything.
Yeah.
And so we did. And yeah, that's how.
But it really is a very interesting gun. And I do like to sit there and think about the alt history implications, the lore implications of this or the AR-16, right, could have happened. In fact, it was close enough that it was talked about anyway, right? There's an old Guns Magazine article piece specifically looking at, and the Gun Magazine editors looked at some of the guns that were also looked at by the military. And they even looked at the FAL again, which was kind of funny. They were like, everything we have sucks so bad, we're willing to go look at the FAL a second time. But that's sort of the short end of the stick belonged to the AR-18, right? The short stroke piston system in general. But it's interesting to sit and look and think about, what if this one developed instead of the AR-15?
Right.
Now, it's probably good that things develop the way they develop, because the AR-18 lowers jack up in the same way this one is, and so it wouldn't be as friendly to polymer as the AR-15 lower itself is. But again, this is close. Even if the pin spacing was different, right? It would have been interesting to see, right? And again, to get your Jim Sullivan, I guess rest in peace now. He did pass away, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But to get your Jim Sullivan fix in, the AR-15, you can't extend the upper any. And we recently talked with a guy who's doing historical history and research on these sorts of things, that had sat down and talked with Sullivan and said, when it comes to the AR-15, and he regrets any of that sort of feedback, and said, I wish I'd made the upper longer. But it's important to remember they designed the AR-15 in 8 months, and it was not scaling down. Scaling down is harder than designing from scratch in those situations. Yeah. And they had 8 months.
There's a series of decisions that were made,
right,
that you then wind up being married to.
Yep. And if they had stretched the receiver by a half inch, it would have been great. It would have made AR-15 smoother, and you could have got closer to constant recoil that Jim Sullivan was chasing much of his life, except for the time that he did the Mini 14, because the opposite of constant recoil, just constant impact. Everything's always hitting each other.
Cast receiver hit it.
But the receiver here, and if you look at the receiver on the Ultimax, you'll go, and when it comes to different developed versions of this, I mean, you could make that receiver 3 inches longer. You'd have to worry about hammer overrun, right, and have some way to lock that out. But provided you did that, you can get as much. You can get to travel back to your sight box, right next to your orbital. Get as much receiver travel as you want, and then you're an Ultimax. Right? Yeah, you've just done it. And there's so much customization that could happen here if the design space wasn't so
AR-15 centric,
right?
Yeah.
And with this tower being here, right? Of course, with the 18 and 180 proper, right? That design space was locked down. It was always going to be locked down. But it would have been really cool if they had just had a tube upper that mounts on, had an end cap at the back for disassembly, because then your design space is open. Put extensions,
you can do whatever you want.
Right, because there's your ultimate gun, right? Is it threaded here at the back, or it has push pins, so you can put an extension on at the back, so you can make it custom recoil, long recoil, constant recoil if you want it.
Yep. It's your, and in an MG capacity, it's your rate of fire adjustment right there, and you could ratchet it. Yeah, brilliant.
But we didn't get that, and it's an interesting cultural artifact these days. These guns cost way too much when you find them.
Way too much, more than they're worth, 100%.
As nice as they can be to shoot.
Yep.
Not worth that. You can get an AR that shoots that nice for, if you build it yourself,
definitely less than that.
Yeah, a lot, like half.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the
100% not worth it. But it is definitely
it's a really cool gun.
It's a gun that, like, when I shoot it, I do think about the future of yesterday.
And people like to shit on the 180B because it's the polymer lower and it is known to fail eventually, right? I mean, you don't have to do anything wrong. Shoot it. It will break. Yep. Eventually, it will happen. Just the way it goes. But people like to crap on them for that and say that the 180 is better. 180 is not better to shoot.
180 is not better, to shoot. The 180 feels like you're shooting a bunch of stamp steel.
Yeah.
That's what it feels. And it makes a really funny noise. Like, I hate the AR boing. The 180 makes a weirder boing. Yeah. It does not inspire confidence.
And I like this better to shoot, hands down, no question. And having the lighter lower doesn't hurt because
it's great.
The 180, you feel it.
Yeah.
It feels like it's full of steel.
Yeah.
Wow, because it's like 50 weldments, just all crap together.
Yeah. But
like 20 feet of weld on your gun.
I adore it. I think it's fantastic. And I think that's all we have for you on the 180B. So thank you guys for coming. And as always, we will see you next time. And be sure to check out the shooting footage. I don't know if that was edited in before this or whether you'll see it now. It all depends. All right. So see you next time.
Well, this is Hornady Frontier. It explodes.
All right. Whoa, is that a gun from the future?
Yeah. And now I've got a clip of ammunition for my plastic Armalite. Wow. So I think it's high and left. It's quite a bit high. Yeah, it's like almost a whole can high.
Okay.
A whole can high and half a can to the left it hits. So you have to hold off the right edge and a whole can below, and then it gets them. Yeah, there she is. There's 3 in there.
Thanks, bud.
I saved you some.
I guess I'll run those. Yeah, lay them here. A clip of ammunition. That's fun.
Yeah, it shoots really smooth.
Yeah. It's got a bolt hold open, but who needs a bolt release?
Yeah.
You don't need that.
Newfangled gadget.
It's a money-making gadget from the future. I really like that shit.
It shoots smooth. The brake keeps it pretty flat.
I don't think that brake's doing anything.
I think
There's
it does.
no constriction at the end. It's like rifled.
I think it keeps. I mean, but pretty big vents.
Yeah.
I think it's helping it because for me the gun was kicking down just a little bit. Like the muzzle was declining rather than climbing.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to. It is a 223. It's not heavy.
Yeah, it's not terribly heavy, and for a piston gun, it's smooth, which doesn't always happen with a piston gun.
It usually doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the gun. I like the gun. The only thing that sucks is that magwell.
Yeah, it definitely needs the KP15 treatment where it's just blown all the way out.
That handguard's not great at...
It does get hot.
And then it gets a little sad. You try it. Look at that steamer.
Yeah, got a little bit of oil coming off of it.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, the selector doesn't click.
Yeah.
And so I thought I missed it completely, but I did not. Oh yeah, that handguard's really heated up.
Yep.
Forgot how high it hits. Jeez. There it is. That was good. There we go.
Thing is so smooth, dude.
Yeah. With the sight zeroed, I think you'd have no problem with that. With the sights the way they are, you have to hold far enough off. It's kind of funky, but it smells like burning
I
plastic.
wasn't having that much of a problem.
Really smells like burning plastic. That's good.
I'm starting.
It's supposed to do that.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that there is like an eye difference thing, because you'll be like, a gun's dead on, and I can't fucking hit anything with it.
Yeah.
But that does happen. Although this has only been like, what, 60 rounds?
Yeah.
And she is unhappy. Of course, that could have been. The plastic is getting sad.
Yeah.
already.
I don't think there's a heat shield under there, and it smells it.
Yeah. But that's something that could have been solved, you know?
Yeah.
If it went anywhere. Which, of course, it didn't. And that sight picture is just such a treat. Yeah, phones are really good at picking that up, but you get the idea. It does smell very bad. That's awesome.
I wonder if it's supposed to have heat shields.